Let's talk about the Chiefs declining the fifth-year option of Clyde Edwards-Helaire, some key takeaways from Andy Reid and Brett Veach's pressers at the Combine today, and look at an unexpected QB that was recently released and has Kansas City listed as the current favored landing spot. But first, how about those? All right, first up, it was recently reported that the Chiefs are expected to decline the fifth-year option on running back Clyde Edwards-Helaire's contract, according to Nate Taylor of The Athletic. I think it was announced on, what is today, Tuesday? Maybe it was yesterday. I can't remember. Time flies. Either way, it was announced, which is no surprise, okay? CEH has faced unfortunate injury issues and really has not lived up to his first-round hype coming out of LSU. In fact, each year he's played in the league, he's continued to decline in overall carries, receptions, and yards due to these injuries and not being out on the field nearly as much as would have been ideal. Even prior to being injured in Week 11 of this past season, CEH lost his starting role to 7th-round draft pick Isaiah "I'm here to take another grown man's job" Pacheco, and after not playing the rest of the season and also for some weird reason skipping the Super Bowl parade to be in a fashion show, I think in New York, it's no surprise the Chiefs don't want to pick up CEH's fifth-year option. Now, to be clear, maybe he had previous permission to skip the Super Bowl parade and go to this fashion show, but it's kind of weird to me to miss the Super Bowl parade. He played over half the season and was a contributor to the Chiefs winning a Super Bowl, even though he did not play in the postseason run. And you're not going to have many Super Bowl parades in your career, so it's a bit weird that he would miss it. Either way, no idea about that, and I don't think the Chiefs would not pick up his fifth-year option as like a petty way to be like,
well, you didn't come to the Super Bowl parade, so not picking it up.
I think it's purely performance-based, and in case you didn't know, a standard rookie contract is 4 years, but NFL teams have the option to extend the contract for a fifth year with players selected in the first round after their third full season in the NFL. And the reason why this is worth looking at is because once a team picks up a player's fifth-year option, that year is fully guaranteed. And if the Chiefs were to pick up CEH's option, he's getting 100% of $5.4 million. And for context on how much that is, that's more, or about the same or a little bit more than CEH will make in the league in his first 4 years. He would make all that in his fifth year. So no thank you, my good sir. Now, the topic of what the Chiefs will do with CEH is probably for another video, because even though the Chiefs aren't expected to pick up his fifth-year option, he's still under contract through the 2023 season. So the Chiefs could keep him around for solid, if healthy, fingers crossed, veteran depth, similar to the role Ronald Jones played last season, basically just stepping in when McKinnon or mainly Pacheco needed a break. Or the Chiefs could opt to shop CEH for a trade and possibly take a swing at draft capital and a bit of freed up cap space. Now, you're not going to get a lot out of CEH, so the Chiefs could very well be keeping him this season, though I wouldn't be surprised if Veach at least called around to see what he could get and possibly even use CEH as leverage to sweeten the deal on another trade if it was a possible position Veach felt the team needed badly enough. We'll dive more into this in a later video, but for now, that is good enough. And from here, I want to touch on a few things that GM Brett Veach and head coach Andy Reid spoke on today during their pressers at the 2023 NFL Combine. First up, Andy Reid mentioned that with Matt Nagy being promoted to the offensive coordinator, David Girardi is going to fill his former spot of QB coach. Girardi was formerly on staff as the pass game analyst and assistant QB coach, so per the norm with Andy Reid, another staff member gets promoted from within. Coach also said Skyy and Kadarius Toney will have bigger roles next year as they will be more familiar with the system and they will be able to utilize them both in different ways. We'll dive into that more in another video, but dude, Kadarius Toney has some crazy ability as a former quarterback. I recently saw a video of him throwing the ball 60 yards on one knee. Good God almighty, so I do like that. Anyway, that's for another time, but he then shouted out Eric Bieniemy saying, "I'm so happy for EB for his chance to put his name on an offense, and this is his now because Ron Rivera is a defensive-minded head coach, and this allows EB to do his thing, and I'm happy for him." Big Red was asked about Frank Clark and basically said, quote, "Veach is juggling all that, but I love Frank Clark. He's a top-notch guy, and I love him to death." It's been noted how close Frank Clark and Andy Reid are. Frank Clark basically said Big Red is like a freaking dad, a father figure to him. Frank did lose his dad to a house fire back in like 2018, so they are very close. Anyway, Veach was asked about Frank Clark as well, and he said, "We will need some cap space to a certain extent," meaning Frank cannot stay on his current deal in which his cap hit will be over $28 million. Good God, but Veach then said, quote, "We have a long history with him and his agent, so I look forward to getting with him and seeing if we can work something out that makes sense for both parties, and I am on board with a Frank Clark return if you can indeed work something out much more team-friendly, though I think there are other players on the team that are more crucial in working something out with and keeping them here, who is going to be a player like the staple of the defense, Chris Jones." Now, he is under contract this year. I just think the Chiefs should consider, in my basement-dwelling opinion, extending Chris Jones. He's currently on the last year of his 4-year, $80 million deal with a cap hit of $28.2 million. So I would expect, or am at least extremely hopeful, that the Chiefs will do what they can to work something out that lowers his cap hit this year, but also does not break the bank and gives the Chiefs a potential out after a couple of seasons. After all, Chris Jones will be 29 in July, and even though he was by far the best defensive tackle in the league, he's not getting any younger. And Brett Veach was asked about Chris Jones when he stepped down off the podium, and he responded saying, quote, "Doing something with Chris would make sense for us," end quote, and added that he thinks Jones wants to retire as a Chief. And I agree. I think Chris Jones is a Travis Kelce type of guy. He wants to play for KC till he retires. He's mentioned that more than once, and may take necessary pay cuts in order to help the team continue chasing rings, and then also be able to stay on the team till he retires and just continue building his legacy. And on the subject of players that need to discuss contracts with the team, Veach said that franchise tagging left tackle Orlando Brown Jr. is an option, but it's more beneficial to get something done long term. "We will have a lot of dialogue," Veach says. "There's a runway to work with now. We know his team better, and hopefully we can get something figured out." Remember, Orlando got his agent like weeks before the deadline, and they could not work something out. Now, what they offered Orlando was allegedly a 6-year deal worth $139 million with an average of $23.6 million per year. They offered him that last offseason, but Orlando wanted more guarantees in the contract, and a deal did not get done, and he played on the tag. So the question is, what about this year? Can they get a deal done? Brett Veach made it seem that he preferred a long-term deal over another tag, so we will definitely have to see how that one plays out. A solid left tackle sure is hard to come by unless you make a swing of a trade like they did for Orlando in the first place, or you go way up in the draft. And while Orlando did give up a lot of pressures last season, he was ranked 17th overall out of 57 tackles who played a minimum of 50% of snaps last year, according to Pro Failure Focus. So he's well up there in the top half of the tackles, but does that mean he deserves to be the highest paid left tackle in the league? I do not necessarily think so, but we'll just have to wait and see how negotiations end up going here in the coming weeks. All right, next up, something unexpected and interesting was brought to my attention today, and that is the fact that QB Carson Wentz, who was released from the Washington Commanders yesterday, is currently looking for a new place to call home. And while that's not surprising, this part is, and that potential home could be Kansas City, or at least Kansas City is the current betting favorite according to Bet Online, as you can see right here. Other landing spots are the Bucs, followed by the Raiders, Panthers, Falcons, and Bills, along with other teams. And while that is a bit random, I think it's because Chad Henne just retired and Andy Reid has a history of employing veteran QBs as his preferred backup. Since coming to KC, Andy has had backups such as Chase Daniel, Nick Foles, Matt Moore, and of course, Chad Henne. And well, Carson Wentz is now a 7-year vet, a former first-round pick of the 2016 NFL Draft. And while he's not a dependable starter these days, in my opinion, and has basically proven as much, the 30-year-old could still have solid veteran years left in the tank. In the 7 games he started last year, he did almost have as many interceptions as he did touchdowns, so not great, but years prior, they have been pretty solid years, and I think in the right system, he could be a dependable QB to have as a veteran presence in case of emergency. Also, Wentz may not mind coming to KC to play behind Mahomes and under Coach Reid on a shorter, affordable deal, so it is not out of the realm of possibilities. There are, of course, other options as well for a backup QB. Marcus Mariota was released from the Falcons today, and some think he would be a better fit overall in comparison to Wentz, but these guys aren't the only options. There are other free agents out there such as Jacoby Brissett, Drew Lock, Andy Dalton, and the list goes on. But the question for me, as well as many of you probably, is where does quarterback Shane Buechele fit into the equation? The Chiefs are obviously high on the 2021 undrafted free agent who trains with Mahomes and Bobby Stroop in the offseason because they basically signed him to the active roster this past year to hide him and prevent him from going elsewhere, more than likely knowing in advance possibly, that Chad Henne was indeed going to retire at the end of the season, and also because Buechele was nearly poached the season prior from the practice squad. And while I do think Shane Buechele has promised as time goes on to be a dependable backup for KC in the very unfortunate and hopefully never really ever happens incident of Patrick Mahomes getting injured, the question still is, will Andy Reid go against the norm of having a veteran QB on the roster with enough experience to come in and lead the offense in high-pressure situations like Chad Henne did in the divisional round of the playoffs last season against the Jags, where he led them 98 yards down the field for a touchdown? You know the story. It was incredible. It's definitely going to be interesting to see what the Chiefs decide to do here. I wouldn't be surprised if they brought in a cheap veteran option. So no breaking the bank, please and thank you, which honestly Carson Wentz may do. He just came off of a pretty large deal, but that still begs the question of Shane Buechele and what they would do with him. My guess is if they brought in a veteran QB, no matter the cost, and keep Buechele on the roster again similar to last season, it means they are still high on Shane, but he's just not quite ready in their eyes to be counted on as the backup just yet. However, if the Chiefs do not bring in a vet and opt to bring in another young QB instead, or maybe just roll with someone like Chris Oladokun, who was on the practice squad last season and is currently signed to a reserve/futures deal, that means they think Shane Buechele is going to be their go-to backup option. But that's where I want to ask you guys, what are your thoughts on all of this? Do you think Coach Reid will continue his trend of bringing in dependable veterans? And if so, could it be Carson Wentz or maybe another veteran free agent? If so, let me know who. Or do you think Shane Buechele is ready to be the guy after being in the system for 2 years and training almost exclusively at the hip of Patrick Mahomes, the greatest QB in the league? Let me know in the comments down below. And until next time, let's go. Let's freaking go. How about those?